you so very much for joining us here today at Church on the Rock. We're so excited to have you, and we pray that God has a very specific word for you today. If you haven't checked out our website, let me urge you to go to jesusistherock.org. There you can find all of our latest news, blog posts, and messages. Also, while you're there, you can very easily give to our ministries financially by clicking on the giving button at the very top right-hand corner of the screen of any web page. Thank you again for joining us today, and let us prepare ourselves to hear from God.
Christmas is my favorite time of the year. I absolutely love it. I love the family gatherings. Of course, love giving to others, and I love the fellowship that we get out of it, and how we get closer to Jesus. Now, I have a little Christmas present for y'all tonight. I loaded up a picture of me whenever I was a kid, and it's during a Christmas season, I guess you could say. That big old guy right there is actually my dad. He's a little older now, and that really cute kid right there is me. And that was Christmas of I want to say 1996, so I'm pretty old. But you know, that's what I looked like whenever I was going through Christmas, whenever I was younger. And most of my story comes from those Christmas seasons that we spent. The reason I love Christmas so much is, number one, the fellowship that I have with my family. Every year we get together at Thanksgiving to sort of plan out what we're going to do for Christmas. And it's so awesome because it's not just like a little bit of my family. It's my siblings, their kids, my parents, their siblings, and there's like 11 of them. And then all of their kids, so that's like 100. And then we have my mom and dad's parents. And so we all sort of smashed together at one of our relatives' house. This year, it was blessingly my mom's house. And if you've ever been to my mom's house, it's kind of small. And so with that, it was crazy. We actually got to sit around this year, and I was sort of contemplating all of this as I sat around with my family and listened to my pawpaw, who's my mom's dad, tell stories about Vietnam whenever he was in the Navy. But I'm pretty sure he made half of them up because about halfway through, they just started getting crazier and crazier and crazier. I'm like, there's no way that that's true. I mean, shot a helicopter through a mountain? No, that's not possible. But my family's crazy, and so with that, you get a lot of rough edges, but then it's kind of like a diamond in the coal. It's a very unique time with our family. If you know any Lawrences, you know that we're pretty loud, and we love having a good time. But we're really loud. Like pretty loud, like really loud. But anyways, so I would be a pretty bad speaker if I didn't mention the presents we get during Christmas. I really like getting presents, right? Who likes giving presents? I love it. Like, that is one of my most favorite things to do, other than teaching kids about God, is giving presents to others. I love just mapping out, what am I going to get my sister? What am I going to get my brother? Because I want to give them something that's not just going to look pretty. It's going to be kind of cool, going to be a toy. I like giving them things that they're going to use for everything that they do. Like my brother last year, I got him a little watch, kind of like this, except it had like a GPS, a map, it had an altimeter, a barometer, it had all sorts of different little tools in it that he could take whenever he's going mountain climbing, and it would be a survival tool for him. So I love doing that kind of stuff. It's really cool. I remember one year I was about 4, about that age right there, and I woke up Christmas morning, and my parents had bought me a bike. And anybody ever remember the Huffy bikes? I don't know if they're still around. I wanted a Huffy bike, so bad. Because I saw the commercials, I was like, man, that kid on that Huffy bike is he's crazy rad. And he's everywhere. Yeah, we used rad back then. But he's ramping off things, and I'm like, man, I want that bike. So I was like, Mom, Dad, I want this bike. Well, you have to learn how to ride it first. And I was like, well, get me one with training wheels. I'll jump off a mountain with it. And so they got me this bike, and it was too big to put into a regular box or wrapping paper, so they had to put it in a trash bag. And Christmas Eve, they took it, put it by the tree, and put my name on it. Well, I was 5 years old. I woke up Christmas morning. I was the first one awake. I was super excited. I was like, man, I got that Huffy bike. So I ran down the hallway, and I got to the Christmas tree, and I was looking around for my gifts, and I was like, man, which one's mine? Okay, that one's mine. It's really small. That one's mine, really small. A garbage bag. And so I turned around and I was like, my parents got me garbage for Christmas. And I was like, this is so ridiculous. And I went in my room and started crying, and Dad walked in there very gingerly, and he was like, Jared, come on. Seriously, come on. Grabbed me by my hand, he walks up me out to the Christmas tree and says, this is not garbage. It's a garbage bag! He's like, it's not garbage. It's a gift. And I was like, I don't believe you. See, I was a little difficult back then. I'm not very difficult nowadays, but I was very difficult back then, and I was like, it's garbage, Dad. It's a garbage bag. That's what they're meant for. And he actually had to open it up, and he said, look. And I was like, oh, wait, that's a bike. So I grabbed my bike, and I went outside and started ramping off stuff. But, I love Christmas gifts. I love giving them. I love receiving them. And it's a really cool thing that we do during Christmas time. But there's one thing I hadn't really mentioned. And it's who? Jesus, right? Christmas is about Jesus. But my parents had a very unique perspective about Christmas and Jesus. They believe that we don't only need to teach kids, or we don't only need to teach our children what happened during Christmas. Jesus was born in a manger in the city of Bethlehem. Then they moved to Nazareth, right? Yeah. So they believed that we should teach them what happened, but they also believed that we should teach our kids why it happened. And so they taught us that Jesus came not just to come and, us to celebrate Christmas for, but he came to save us, and he came to save us from the destination that we had after death. And so they did this a little differently. And I'm sort of going to call it access. Everybody say that with me. Access. Access. You're supposed to say it again, access. I'm just kidding. So they started with access. And this is what I want you to do. I want you to turn to your neighbor really quick. I want you to say, I have access to God. All right, now turn to your other neighbor. Say this. Do you want access to God? So tonight we're talking about having access to God, and we're talking about leading others to that access. And my parents were actually really good at providing this access to God. Every Christmas, my mom did something very special. I've never really seen it done before, or I've never seen anybody do it. And you can definitely steal this idea for your own kids, because it's pretty awesome. Last time I spoke, and pretty much every time I speak, I mention my mom, right? Well, she is a really, really, really good cook. In fact, she's like the best cook. It's probably written somewhere in 2 Jeremiah of the newly inspired version that she is the best cook. And I don't know if you know this, but she actually cooks gumbo out of the fair booth. And that gumbo is the best gumbo out there. Like, it gets 4.7 stars out of 5 every single year based on my opinion. So it's pretty important. Like, it's pretty good. And so she's a really good cook. Well, every year she cooks a birthday cake for Christmas. This is kind of weird, right? Anybody else do that? Anybody else cook a birthday cake for Christmas? Okay, some of us, right? But it's very rare. And she did this for the sole reason of teaching us what Christmas was about. Because as a 4-year-old, I'm thinking, oh, there's a birthday cake. That means it's somebody's birthday. They got to be important. They have to be like family, have to be one with the group. And so you can kind of see where I'm going here. My mom used it to teach who God was in our family. Now, she makes the best cakes. I think last year for my birthday, she made wonderfully delicious concoction of a cake. It was like this huge mound of chocolate and vanilla ice creams put on a frozen metal slab, and then around it, she built this fortress of cake and all sorts of goodies, and then in between each cake layer was strawberry jam. She put strawberries in it, and she drizzled it with rich dark chocolate fudge and caramel, and it was this beautiful pyramid of goodness. And then to top it all off, whenever she scooped everything out of it, she'd toss it in a waffle cone. Now, what is that? That sounds really good, right? You probably want some cake right now. But she makes really good cakes, and so she spends a whole lot of time. I think she spends probably 3 days planning out the cake, like getting the perfect ingredients and just investing so much time. And she did this for Christmas. And I'm like, this guy must be really important. And so finally I asked her, I said, well, why are you baking a birthday cake? I was about 4 years old. I said, Mom, why are you doing this? I don't understand. It's nobody's birthday. And that was, you ready for it? That was the access that she had to me. She used that birthday cake as a sort of icebreaker for telling me why she cared so much about Jesus. And so she told me the story. She said, Jesus was born to a Virgin Mary, and went through the whole story. And she talked about how important he was in our lives and why we should care about him. And so she used the access she had to teach me about Jesus. And so tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about the access we have with others. My parents were a great example, and they really, I don't know, she was like I think she was the best children's pastor I've ever been under because she just taught in these kinds of ways. But tonight we're in Mark chapter 10. If you have a Bible, you can turn to that real quick. And we're going to look at how the Bible tells us about how we have access to Jesus. Mark chapter 10. Is it up there? Oh, sweet. Okay, sorry. Mark chapter 10, verse 13 says, "And they were bringing children to him that he might touch them, and the disciples rebuked them." Next. "But when Jesus saw it, he was indignant and said to them, 'Let the children come to me. Do not hinder them, for to such belongs to the kingdom of God.'" My translation says it a little bit differently. This is the Amplified version. It says, "They kept bringing young children to him," Jesus, "that he might touch them, and the disciples were reproving them for it. But when Jesus saw it, he was indignant and pained, and said to them, 'Allow the children to come to me. Do not forbid or prevent or hinder them, for such belongs the kingdom of God.'" And so we come into this story with Jesus teaching to the multitudes. He has the disciples around him who's sort of helping him with the crowds. And these parents keep bringing these kids to him. And the disciples are like, "Man, those are kids. Kids don't really learn that well whenever they're kids. They don't really understand. And plus, they haven't gone through the training that all of us have gone through. They haven't learned their basics. So how are they even going to understand how Jesus is? How are they going to understand his message? How are they going to understand what he brings to the table?" And so the disciples were like, they don't really belong. And that's whenever they were like, "Okay, no more. Quit bringing your kids up here. I'm done with it." But Jesus saw what was going on. It says he was indignant. He was irritated. He was aggravated. But he was also pained. And I love how my translation says that. It's almost like he went through suffering to see that happened. And I can only explain it like this. It's like if you had a little boy, and that little boy wanted to play football. So you brought the little boy to the peewee little field, and you said, "Okay, you're going to learn how to play football under this coach." And so he's in his uniform, he has his pads on, he has his jersey, his football shorts, his cleats, and he's getting ready, he's getting warmed up, he's just ready to go out there and play. So you take him out there, he goes to the coach, he says, "Coach, where do I need to be?" "All right, go do this, blah, blah, blah." Well, after practice is over, coach comes up to you and says, "You can pay $300 to send your kid to this football peewee thing, but it's not going to work. In fact, your kid really can't play football. If he stays on my team, I'm just going to sideline him. Like, there's no reason for him to do it." Or what about this? You have a little girl, you take her to ballet, and you pay the instructor, you're like, "Hey, teach my kid ballet." And so I don't know what happens in a ballet place, but they teach you ballet. And then afterwards, if the lady come up to you and was like, "Your daughter, she's not really good at ballet. In fact, I'm not even going to put her into any competitions. She's not even worth the attempt. We probably shouldn't do it." It's almost like that. If you were a parent and you went through that, you'd be pretty pained, right? Because it's almost like the teachers were telling you that your kid isn't good enough. And so that's sort of how I can explain it. It's almost as if Jesus went through pain whenever he saw this. Because by refusing the children, the disciples were actually telling the kids that they weren't even worth the effort. Weren't even worth the effort. And it pained him to see that way. So he slaps their hand. He says, guess what? That's not what I'm about. He says, truly I tell you, whoever does not receive and accept and welcome the kingdom of God like these little children do, will not enter at all. So what does that mean? It means if we don't accept the fact that Jesus came for all and not just a select few, then we may not even get into heaven. We've got to offer that to everybody we see. In Mark chapter 11, if you flip over to the next chapter, verse 15 tells us this. And they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he was teaching them and saying to them, is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations? But you have made it into a den of robbers. So we come into this part of the story. Jesus is in Jerusalem, and he notices a couple of people have set up like shops around the temple, and they're selling doves. They're selling sacrifices, but they're not just selling sacrifices. There's actually people going through there like getting other stuff, like stuff that we would get at Walmart. And my translation says this. He began to drive out those who sold and bought in the temple, and he overturned the tables for money changers and seats of those who dealt in doves. And he did not permit anyone to carry stuff through the temple because they were using it as a shortcut and creating a lot of traffic. And he taught them, is my house not a prayer for all the nations? The people who were selling things and the people who were buying things, they were removing access to those who needed to get in the temple by creating all this foot traffic. And not only that, but they were making the temple a marketplace. And so whenever the church becomes something other than what God designed it, he gets pretty irritated, I'd say. He flipped over tables and chairs. He was pretty angry. And so God's very passionate for this message. He does not like it when people remove access to him. And he doesn't like it whenever God gives us access to people and we are disobedient and we don't continue to offer people the good news. What Jesus says in Mark 10 just sort of resonates with me. He says, do not forbid or prevent or hinder them from coming to me. Do not forbid or prevent or hinder them from coming to me. How are we hindering God's love from reaching others around us? How are we hindering God's love from reaching those around us? Maybe it's our attitudes. I have a pretty sucky attitude sometimes. Like, I get a little lazy. If you believe that or not. What about how the way we deal with people? How the way we deal with people? Do we deal with people in love, or do we deal with people out of impatience, or deal with people out of irritation? How do we deal with people? Do people look at us and say, oh, "Well, you just treated him that way, so how do you even say you're a Christian?" Thought Jesus was supposed to be about love. Erica said it right tonight when she said, we need to be examples. How is our example? Do we look like Christians? Do we look like people who follow Jesus? Or do we look like people who follow the world? Because there's only really two options. How about the way that we get out of situations that crop up in our lives? Do we get out of them in an honorable way? Or do we lie, steal, cheat to get out of situations that we get into? How are we hindering God's love from reaching those around us? And these questions may not be for you. Maybe, life's pretty great for you. Maybe you're kind of skirting by, doing just enough to get by. But I have a question for you too. What are you not doing that God's called you to do? I get that a lot. from God, by the way. God asked me, what are you not doing, Jared? I'll give you an example. I was, an individual called me this week and just sort of wanted to chat and talk a little bit. And one of their stories was this. They were in the library, and a classmate had their child that was over there, and the individual was trying to study in the library, and the kid kept on doing like playful things towards them and wanted to play games or whatever. And so they started going back and forth, started playing a little bit. And then the individual realized very quickly that they weren't going to be able to study because they were so distracted, so they just packed up their stuff and they were walking out. Well, the kid was like, "Hey, what are you doing? Where are you going?" And so the individual walked over and started talking a little bit, chit-chatted, and then left. Now, doesn't sound like a very significant story, right? Sounds kind of, you need to find $5 somewhere, right? Sounds kind of boring. But God asked me a question while I was hearing this. He said, "Jared, how many opportunities have I given you to introduce me to somebody, and you've just squandered away? How many opportunities have I given you for you to introduce me to somebody, and you've just squandered it away?" See, God provides with us amazing opportunities to expand the kingdom in a lot of different ways. Maybe it's a coworker that comes to you for advice. Or maybe you're at a gas station. This happened to me the other day. Maybe you're at a gas station and somebody comes up and they're like, "Hey, can I borrow some gas money?" And deep down you're like, "Man, I don't want to give you gas money." But then God says, "Hey, Jared, feed the poor." May not seem like much, but to them it may seem the world. Who is God providing you with access to, and how are you dealing with it? Are you speaking life into them? Or are you squandering it away? I'll give you another good example, and this is my last one. About 4 years ago, out at the fair booth, by the way, if I hadn't mentioned already tonight, my mom cooks gumbo. It's the best around. And she cooks it out at the fair booth, Liberty Church. It's pretty phenomenal. But I go out there every year to just hang out and to serve the community and just really to hang out and talk to people. And about 4 years ago, I was sitting in the back helping Mom do the grill. I was cooking not cooking the gumbo, but serving the gumbo, cooking the hot dogs and the hamburgers and the French fries. And it was kind of slow. We lost a lot of workers because it was so slow. And I was just kind of sitting there leaning up, and there's a little window in the grill. And you can look right out the window and see what's going on in the front. So I was sitting there leaning on the window. I was looking out, and I was sort of watching everybody. Watching people walk by. I was watching our workers work. And these two kids kind of walked up, kind of slow, up to the booth, kind of like they were cautious. And they were kind of pointing at the menu and kind of going down it. And so I got a little curious. I was like, "What's going on here?" And so they're kind of pointing at the menu, and they're like, "Man, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this." But then they're like, "Hey, I just want couple cups of water." And the lady who was taking the order was she was like, "I don't know what to do here. Like, they want cups of water. Usually we charge like 50 cents for a cup and ice. So do I need to charge them or whatnot?" Luckily, my brother, JM, was standing right by him, and he said, No, it's okay. Just give them the water, and then it'll be okay. So he fills their waters up, he gives them to him, and he says, "Hey, let's go sit down and talk for a little bit." So he goes out there and he talks to him, and turns out they were the kids of a fair employee. And that fair employee didn't really have enough money to feed them for the entire week because they didn't get paid until the end of the week. And so Jane was like this, "Okay, well, what does your parents do? What do your parents do?" The kid said, "Well, it's only my mom, and she does cotton candy, and that's how we get money, by selling cotton candy." And Jane was like, "Well, how about this? You bring me a bag of cotton candy every single day this week, and I'll give you just an order form, let you fill it out all the way. You can get food for all day long. We'll wrap up some stuff to go, and then you'll be set." So 3 days he does this. They bring him cotton candy. He wraps their order up, send them on their way. Well, at the third day, the kids didn't come. And so Jane was like, "That's a little weird." But then this woman comes up to the prayer booth, and she says, I got to know, who is this that's blessing my family? And J.M. was like, well, it's not really me. And he sat her down and just talked about how God had moved in his life and how he's kind of urged him to move in her life. And so he got to share who Jesus was with this woman. Now, I'll tell you this is the most powerful part of the story. Those kids and that mother may have never stepped foot in a church before, but I promise you this, after that week, they will now be stepping on streets of gold because of the opportunity that JM was given. And so he got to share Christ with them. He got to share how awesome God is and the love that God has for us. And by the end of the week, he had actually volunteered my Bible that I got for Christmas that year and his Bible and gave him a little bit of reading material for them to sort of busy themselves with until Jesus comes back. And so it was an awesome opportunity that God had given them. And so God provided the access to the family for my brother, and he did the right thing by extending that invitation to them, by extending the invitation to the kingdom. And if he would have not done that, he would have fallen into the former category of hindering, right? Jesus says, do not forbid or prevent or hinder them at all, for such will be blessed by the kingdom. And so that was it. He just followed that simple rule. And so I'll leave you with this question tonight. What opportunities is God presenting in your life? What opportunities is God presenting in your life? Who is God put in your life for you to touch? Who is God giving you access to in order for you to further God's kingdom? And are you extending the invitation? Or are you hindering the will that God has for you? Let's pray.
Again, thank you so very much for joining us here today at Church on the Rock. I pray that our message has impacted you in a positive way. If you would like to share how our ministries are impacting you, you have a specific prayer request, or maybe you want more information about our church or how to get involved in our ministries, you can easily email us at pray@jesusistherock.org, or you can look us up on Facebook or Twitter at Church on the Rock, Pascagoula. Have a very blessed day.